to Flourish-Meant, the podcast on living life as you are meant to, so you can flourish. I am delighted to welcome my friend, Susan Neal, who is an RN, a certified health and wellness coach, and an award-winning author of 7 healthy living books. She is here to talk to us about a wonderful topic that many of us might be curious about or wonder if we're even suffering from this issue: how to solve the gluten puzzle. Welcome, Susan. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thanks, Tina, for having me.
Tell us what in your background inspired you to write about gluten and gluten issues.
Well, it was a year ago that my older sister came to visit me, and she had such problems with her gastrointestinal tract. And she has gluten sensitivity, but she's highly gluten sensitive, kind of like celiac. And whenever we went out to dinner, it was a real hassle. She had to, be very careful. Sometimes the chef would come out. She's like, I'm like celiac. There can't be even a breadcrumb that touches my food, or I will get, very ill. And I just opened this world of, wow, she is so affected by gluten. I wanted to help others who were in a predicament like her, to where it harmed them when they ingested foods that contained gluten.
Can you tell us a little bit more about gluten-related illnesses? How common are these?
It's amazing. It's 10% of the population.
Wow.
So one out of every 10 people have a gluten-related illness. There's 4 different disorders, but would you believe almost 80% of the people are undiagnosed?
That is scary.
It is. And there's it's not just gastrointestinal symptoms. There's random symptoms like neuropathy, like of your hands or feet, and they'll tingle or go numb for no reason. And it's just intermittent. And you're thinking, this is, am I going crazy? No, you're not. That's a symptom of a gluten-related disorder. It's like piecing a puzzle together to kind of figure this out, whether you have one or not.
That is fascinating. I would never have guessed that neuropathy could be a symptom of gluten sensitivity. What are some of the other symptoms that they might be able to tell if they are suffering from a gluten-related issue?
6,000 patients were evaluated, and this is their top ones. Abdominal pain, eczema or a rash, migraine headaches, foggy brain, chronic fatigue, diarrhea, depression, anemia, tingling of the fingertips, and joint pain. So that was the top symptoms, but there are over 200 symptoms for celiac disease, and there's over 100 for non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
That's incredible. Are these conditions temporary or permanent? Can they be healed or improved in some way?
They're permanent. And there's 4 different types of disorders. One, celiac disease, and it's an autoimmune disease. And the second one is gluten sensitivity. The third one is wheat sensitivity, and I actually have wheat sensitivity. The fourth one is wheat allergy. And when I was a child, I had a wheat allergy, and they did the skin prick tests on my back, and they saw that, okay, I was allergic to wheat. But most kids grow out of it, when they get to their teen years, and I did. So with celiac disease, a lot of the people who have this disease don't have the classic celiac, which is all the gastrointestinal issues and the malnourishment and malabsorption. That's the way it was, 50, 100 years ago. But now they have all these really weird random symptoms of celiac disease. And that's why it's a stumbling block with getting diagnosed. In fact, a decade ago, it took over a decade to be diagnosed with one of these disorders. And with gluten sensitivity, it did not even become a medical diagnosis until 2010. So it wasn't even recognized as a medical diagnosis until then.
Do you find that in the medical field, a lot of physicians are skeptical about gluten sensitivity?
I think the medical field is coming around and they understood that they were behind. So in 2010, they got this big international task force in Oslo, Norway, and they defined the diagnosis and the diseases like gluten sensitivity. However, if a physician was trained 20 years ago and it was never in the medical books, they may not be as familiar with it. But researchers are really trying to find a diagnostic test to determine if a person has gluten sensitivity, but currently none exists. So there's no single diagnostic test to tell if you have gluten sensitivity or irritable bowel syndrome. Both of those are like, okay, let's rule out this, let's rule out that. But neither one of those conditions has a single test that determines whether you have it.
That must be very frustrating for both those who are suffering from these types of disorders and the physicians that are trying to treat them. If someone listening is experiencing some discomfort or they're having some mysterious health issues or just not feeling well and they can't figure out why, what is the first thing that they can do to begin to unravel this puzzle, as you've called it in the title of your book, of gluten, to see if that might be their problem?
They want to go to their doctor, and ask to be tested for gluten sensitivity or, celiac disease. And to help them, I created a test that they can take. It's called the Gluten Quiz. And if they go to my website, Susan, U as in umbrella, Neal, NEAL.com/gluten quiz, they can download a 10-page quiz, and it has like all the different symptoms, the 200 symptoms for celiac disease, the 150 for gluten sensitivity, and they can see whether they believe that they have this disorder, and they bring that to their physician, and the physician can do a blood test to see. Celiac disease can be easily diagnosed through a blood test, but then you have to confirm it with a upper GI where they actually take biopsies of the gastrointestinal tract. And gluten sensitivity, there's no single diagnostic test. And then there's the wheat allergy, where you can have a skin prick test on the back of your back, or you can have a blood test.
So you can test for celiacs or wheat allergy, but you can't really test definitively for gluten. It's more of a, similar to mental health, you have to go through the symptoms and try to verify if that is really the diagnosis that applies best, and try to see if some of the solutions will work. What do people do if they find out that this is a problem for them and they're planning to go to celebrations or they're traveling? How do they handle being gluten sensitive? Celiacs would be a whole nother ballgame. That's a really serious thing to have to limit your diet with. But if they're wheat sensitive or if they are gluten sensitive, what are some things that they can do to prepare for celebrations and travel where they don't have full control over their diet?
Well, thank goodness that the gluten-free diet is like very prevalent today. In fact, most restaurants, lots of chain restaurants, you look at the bottom and it'll have like a little GF for what all the different menu items that are gluten-free. So most times you can order gluten-free items. And even if they don't have that, you could just get a meat and vegetables and just avoid the bread or the stuffing or the soups, anything that like would with gravy that would be a thickener that you would put like flour in to thicken it. You would want to avoid that. So you want to embrace a gluten-free diet. If you're going to holiday events, then what would be great is go for the vegetables and the fruit, the meats, the salad. Those are all naturally gluten-free.
Oh, that's good to know because you can always stick with the meat and the vegetables. I would never have guessed you'd have to avoid soup. That's something that's surprising to me.
Yes. You add that to thicken it, the soup, the stews, the sauces, the salad dressing. Salad dressings, most of them have gluten.
Interesting. And what about things that people drink? Is gluten in any of those?
I primarily drink water.
If they
I
had punch, if some people listening may drink alcohol, I don't know if that is a gluten sensitive issue, or if someone is drinking a soft beverage, or if they're drinking ginger ale or something along those lines, would that be something that would be a problem? Or because sometimes things are not all natural.
If it is a flavoring, like let's say it's a cherry flavoring or a lemon flavoring, a lot of things that are have the flavorings are gluten.
Oh,
So even a vinegar that's like flavored or an olive oil that is flavored many times will have gluten in it. So you want to avoid things with flavorings or natural flavors. Yes, you wouldn't think that because
so even natural flavors can have gluten?
yes,
Wow. Well, that's
yes.
enlightening. I would never have dreamed that natural flavors would have gluten included in them.
Right. For alcoholic beverages, you want to avoid all types of beer unless it says it's a gluten-free beer, which breweries are starting to make now. And distilled wine is perfectly fine. Wine does not have any type of gluten in it. And for alcoholic beverages, the distilled liquors have gone through a distillation process that eliminates the gluten that contained in it. But my sister, who's highly gluten sensitive, she will only drink things that is certified gluten free.
That's interesting. So, someone with a sensitivity can still celebrate. They just need to be aware of what they can have and what they can't have before they go, rather than demanding the host accommodate them as a guest, because that can be prickly and difficult for the person going to a celebration.
It sure can. I've gone through, all of that and, steps by step of what you do when you're at buffets or restaurants or sporting events or wherever traveling, wherever you may be. Like even if you're going on a cruise, you can call the cruise line beforehand and say that I'm gluten free and they will completely accommodate you with great food and you won't have to worry about it.
So, if you have gluten issues and you are in control of your diet, does that change issues with weight loss when somebody realizes that they have had a gluten sensitivity and had trouble losing weight? Could that have been a barrier with retaining fluids due to an allergy to wheat or any of those things?
Absolutely. And you have to think about what this does. Okay, we're consuming the wheat products or the gluten. It could also be made out of it's a wheat, rye, and barley, but it's primarily wheat. And so we're ingesting those, and our body is saying this is a foreign substance. And it's causing all of this inflammation in your body, in your joints. Remember, joint pain was one of the big things. If you have joint pain, there's inflammation. Well, what is causing that? Well, it's something you're consuming. And It could be the gluten. And so your whole body is inflamed. It might be your gastrointestinal tract. It might be your joints. It might be your brain with the foggy brain and these headaches, and you just suffer from these headaches and you just want this to stop. Well, if you eliminate the source, I love to get to the root cause of a problem. You eliminate the source, the issue, you take it away. Oh my gosh, you have clarity of mind. I've had friends who, my headaches, they're gone, completely gone. The joint, the swelling, the inflammation, it all went down. Joint pain is gone. The rashes are gone. And their body begins to heal then, because you see, God made our bodies to heal. We just have to figure out and solve this puzzle as to whether you have a gluten-related diagnosis for your body to begin healing.
So, healing is possible for someone who's had all of these mystery symptoms. Do you find that people who have had gluten sensitivity or wheat allergies are those who crave those types of foods the most?
Oh, yes, yes. My daughter was one of them. Oh my gosh, she was a wheat fanatic. It was the pasta, it was the breadsticks. I mean, she just, loved it, and she never had an issue, no gastrointestinal problem, whatever. And when she became lactose intolerant, we had her tested, and they did a celiac test, and it was negative, and they said she was not gluten sensitive. And then they did a stool test, and in her stools there's all these gliadin antibodies. Well, gliadin is the gluten in wheat. So her gastrointestinal tract is full of these antibodies just going off with inflammation. And so she was starting to have all these food allergies. And it was caused by that, a gluten sensitivity that was undiagnosed, and it just went from one thing to the next.
So, someone with this internal issue with gluten sensitivity or wheat allergy can have these symptoms for years and not realize it, or may even have no symptoms until a certain point and begin to have symptoms and not understand where they're coming from.
That's right. Like for me, as a kid, I had the wheat allergy. And then 8 years ago, I had a health crisis. And after that, I noticed that wheat really caused me to be foggy brain, lethargic, etc. And I try to avoid it, but I'm not as sensitive as my sister. So I can eat it, if I want to splurge on tiramisu or something. Until this year, they found 7 small nodules on my thyroid. Well, Hashimoto's, a thyroid disease, kind of coincides a bit with this gluten-related conditions. So I'm like at the tippy top. Okay, am I going to keep eating the wheat and go into making these nodules that I have? They're all within normal limits. The doctor says they're all very, very small. That's because I primarily maintain my gluten-free diet. But you see, this was happening all the time, and I did not realize it. But now that I know that I have these small little nodules, we want to keep them small. I don't want to go into Graves' disease or Hashimoto's thyroid disease. So I have got to maintain a strict gluten-free diet.
It's important to take care of this right away, then, to prevent major health issues like thyroid disorders.
It is. It is. And with celiac disease, it's an autoimmune disorder. And so the sooner you catch it, the better. And if you catch it early enough, then your gastrointestinal tract will heal. Because with celiac disease, what happens is you have these little hair-like projectiles on the inside of your gastrointestinal tract. Well, your body starts to kill those hair-like projectiles, and then you can't absorb the foods. You become malnourished, even though you might be overweight because you're consuming tons of food, but you're not absorbing the nutrients. And so then it moves on and the body starts to harm other areas of your body. You might get diabetes. You might get the Hashimoto. So it moves to other autoimmune diseases.
That
Yes.
is incredibly frightening that we could have those autoimmune diseases and thyroid issues all together just because of a gluten sensitivity. And people might be tempted to dismiss it because they figure it's just too hard. It's too hard to live gluten free. Have you found that it's difficult to make that transition, or are there ways to ease that and make it palatable and beneficial and actually enjoyable to live a gluten free lifestyle?
Oh, a gluten-free lifestyle is great. I mean, you can eat a delicious fish dinner. I mean, you can have filet mignon. I mean, there's just God made 100 different vegetables. Look at all the different fruits. Yes, and there's so much more nutritious than that white bread or that dessert. Absolutely is. And I help people with getting off sugar and carbs with my previous book was the 7 steps to get off sugar and carbohydrates. That book, I elicit God's power and helping to make that difficult lifestyle change because it is difficult. And the first, few weeks to a month, it's hard to change your palate. But once you get over it, then you don't crave the sugar and carbs anymore. And you start, for my daughter, it was amazing. For 5 to 6 weeks, she couldn't have the wheat anymore. For 5 to 6 weeks, she ate huge amounts of food, huge. I mean, like a plate and a half full. And then after 6 weeks, she went back to her normal appetite because you see, her body was actually starving from the essential vitamins and minerals that God gives us in our vegetables and fruits and in our meats.
Well, that's a relief to know that even though it will be hard at the beginning, we can begin to enjoy a lifestyle that is gluten free or perhaps even carbohydrate free or low in carbohydrates anyway, so that we can live an abundant life and not have to worry about tremendous long term health issues inhibiting the quality of our life at the middle or end of our lives because we have not made that switch. So that is encouraging. What are some resources that you have in your book? I know that you've included recipes, all kinds of things. Can you tell us about the benefits of your new book, Solving the Gluten Puzzle?
Okay, well, I want to tell you one thing is that it's important for everyone to be tested to see if they have celiac disease before they go on a gluten-free diet. Because once you're on a gluten-free diet and you get tested, there's no more gluten antibodies. And so the doctor is like, they can't diagnose you.
Mm.
So that's what happened to my sister. So my sister, she finally tried a gluten-free diet a second time because the first time it was hard to figure out all the different things that contained gluten. So she went gluten-free for months. Then her doctor tested her and she was negative for celiac disease. There's no specific test for gluten sensitivity, so he diagnosed her as gluten sensitive. But she could actually be celiac and we don't know it. But she can't tolerate going back on wheat because, she's just has violent gastrointestinal distress from it. So number one, be tested. And then some things that are beneficial. I have 50 recipes included in my book, Solving the Gluten Puzzle. I go through the 4 different diagnoses, the different tests you can have to diagnose those, and then all the symptoms, as well as transitioning. And it's an adjustment in how you transition, and then how you deal with going to restaurants or friends' houses or potlucks, making that adjustments and traveling and going to restaurants. And that's all contained in the book.
That sounds like an incredible resource. And you are also a certified health and wellness coach, so you can walk people through this process as a coach if they're interested in hiring you that way as well. How can people stay connected with you and be apprised of the new books that you have coming out and maybe hire you as a speaker or as a coach?
You can go to Susan U, that's U like umbrella, Neal, Neal.com.
I hope that all of you listening will connect with Susan. And if you feel like you are not feeling well, make sure that you check out her new book, Solving the Gluten Puzzle, which is now available. You can get it as a gift. You can get it as a gift for yourself. You can definitely avail yourself of all of her wonderful resources, especially that amazing quiz that she mentioned at Susan U. Neal, Neal.com. Make sure that you check her out. I am so glad that you came on today, Susan. This has been an incredibly valuable resource for all the listeners to be able to get that information.
Thank you so much, Tina.
It was wonderful to have you. I hope that all of you come back next time for another episode of Flourish-Meant.